Now, my guest in studio today is Edward Carey of Carey Auctioneers in Enfield, and we're continuing our Thought Leaders series here on LMFM today. And Edward Carey is the past president of the Irish Valuers and Auctioneers Institute and the current chairman of the residential group of the Society of Chartered Surveyors of Ireland. And he's hopefully going to share his thoughts with us on the state of the very beleaguered Irish property market and whether there's any light at all at the end of the tunnel. Good morning, Edward. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Orlaith. Delighted to be here.
Now, you've been around this property scene for a long time and you've headed up these very distinguished organisations in the property scene. So I'd say you're somebody who knows all about this. What is your reaction to kind of the latest statistics coming out? You always kind of feel, well, I personally feel that the statistics are maybe a little bit behind the curve, that they come out and they nearly cause a further drop in prices because we're reacting to something that actually was pertaining to 3 months ago.
Absolutely. They can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't claim to have a monopoly on any of the knowledge out there. I've been involved in the business for about 20 years, so I've seen quite a bit. The latest statistics coming from the CSO are reversing the trend that they've been producing for this year to date, where they had been looking at a bottoming out of the property market primarily in Dublin and marginal increases. So this most recent one, they're looking at a slight drop in property prices, so minus 0.8% in Dublin and minus 1.1% nationally. Now, what that's really doing is compounding the year-on-year drops. So they are pointing to a continuing significant drop in property prices. What we did notice in the year-to-date, particularly in Dublin, is that drop certainly seemed to have stopped with a slight increase in prices in certain areas in Dublin. So,
and Edward, sorry now to cut across you, what does that mean to the average person in terms of we're all watching the market? We've become a nation of property watchers because of the crash, and we're all wondering, is it the time to buy if you're in that market, or if you have to sell, you're saying, should I wait and it might come back up a little? Yeah. So what does it mean to us?
What's going on? So in its simplest terms, I think what it means is that we effectively have a two-tier property market. Okay, so you've got what's going on inside Dublin and what's going on outside of Dublin. And the reason we look at Dublin is because Dublin is the capital city, it's the biggest population, it's where the employment is, it's where the government is, it's where the civil service is, and fundamentally it's where the action is. So you would expect that if there's going to be any form of a performing market in anything, be it property, be it construction, be it retail, be it whatever, it's going to start in Dublin. So that's why we're looking at Dublin. So Dublin certainly, it has seen the greatest drop first and foremost. So the peak to trough, or the peak to present drop in Dublin has been about 57%, and that's lagging outside of Dublin. And I think what has happened is that the country hasn't caught up properly with the scale of the drop.
And that 50% or 57% in the drop in price, would that be, say, the average 3-bed semi-detached in a nice development in Dublin, in a suburb of Dublin?
Yes, that's an average. Now look, there's problems with average because you're looking at apartments, and you're looking at big houses and small houses and all the rest of it. But fundamentally, what you try to benchmark it against is a semi-detached house, be it a 3 or 4 bed semi-detached house, because that's the house that most people are familiar with, and it's the house that trades most frequently. So really, when we try to pin down what's happening in the market, we try to have a look at what's happening in the semi-detached sector of that market. So like I say, in Dublin, things do seem to have bottomed out. There's a very active market for the right type of property in the right type of location.
So you think things are moving again in Dublin?
Without question. And our members are certainly reporting that scarcity is actually becoming an issue now in Dublin. So a lot of the available stock is drying up. And so that's going to present its own problems. Property, it's a product. So all other things being equal, it's going to behave like normal economics. You've got supply and you've got demand. And where you've oversupply, prices are going to drop, and where you've undersupply, that's going to indicate the prices will go back up. So when we look at the two-tier property market again, in Dublin the supply is drying up, and that's going to start pushing prices back up. And outside of Dublin there's a huge amount of supply, not enough demand, and that's, I think, pointing towards a further drop in prices outside of Dublin.
You hear, before we come to outside Dublin, Edward, just staying in Dublin for a moment, you hear about the, anecdotally, about the 30-somethings that are poised, ready to buy again. And so many of them have not bought over the last 4 or 5 years. I'm reminded of the American sitcom years ago, 30-something. I don't know if you used to watch it, but they used to all sit around this island in this lovely kitchen and chopping the vegetables and have this lovely dinner party where everybody stood around in a very cool way and chopped the vegetables as they chatted around this island. And we all wanted one of those islands in our kitchens. Correct. And that sort of triggered this whole boom 20 years ago. And funnily enough, sitting with a group of 30-somethings recently, I heard them obsessing about property prices and whether they would buy a house in this estate or maybe the one next door, and maybe they would start in this estate and then buy the one in the one next door. And I thought, they're in the same space exactly where we were 20 years ago. So is that group of people poised and ready to buy, and will that trigger a recovery?
Absolutely. That's the demographic. That's primarily where the recovery is going to come from if it happens. And certainly the mortgage approval statistics, so the IBF, the Bankers Federation, the mortgage groups, they're certainly reporting that there's a significant increase in mortgage approvals. So they're the 30-somethings that you're talking about, that's talking about where they're going to buy. So if they're thinking about buying, the first thing they have to do is make sure they can get a mortgage. So they have their mortgages, and now they're looking at properties. But they then have to make the next significant step, and that's actually to go and buy the property and draw down that mortgage. And we're not fully seeing...
And to have the confidence to do that, isn't that the key thing?
That's exactly it. The two main drivers are credit and confidence. So first and foremost, those people have to have the confidence that they think now is the time to buy, and the time for them to buy. So it may not be somebody else's time to buy, but they have to believe that the time is right for them to buy. And secondly, then credit. The credit has to be available. And at the moment, it's a downward spiral of credit and confidence, okay? So both of those have dried up. And again...
Now, the banks would argue that they are lending, and they do advertise all the time that they are lending. I mean, but again, you would feel it differently maybe within the industry. Do you think that's feeding through?
Lending levels for 2011 were at the same level as they were back in 1973.
Wow.
Okay, so banks, yes, they are lending, but it's at a very, very small percentage. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And there are just some statistics I had a look at this morning before I came out, where I had a look at My Home, the property website. And it just gives us an indication of what's going on in the market at the moment. So to look at Louth, the county of Louth at the moment, there are just about 1,000 properties advertised for sale in Louth at the moment. And there are 70 properties in the entire county of Louth sale agreed. So that's a very small percentage. That's only 7%, so it's less than 10%. Meath as a county then is faring slightly better. About 1,300 properties advertised for sale, about 1,000 sale agreed. So that's a 15% conversion rate. And then when you move into Dublin, so I just looked at North County Dublin. So again, we're back into this two-tier market that we discussed. So North County Dublin has about 2,000 properties for sale and just about 900 sale agreed. So that's about 45% of properties that are advertised for sale. About 45% then are sale agreed at the moment. And that's the significant difference that's taking place, what's inside Dublin and what's outside of Dublin.
And Edward, if we were to have taken a snapshot of those statistics at the time of the boom, roughly what percentages sale agreed would be standing there at any one time? I know I'm landing you with that statistic, but just roughly ballpark, what was the comparison?
For the peripheral counties, so for Louth and Meath, that number would have been an awful lot closer to the 50% that's going on in Dublin. And the types of properties that are suffering most at the moment are the detached rural properties. So when you move into urban areas, that percentage is going to increase because, again, we're into the 3 and 4 bed semis that we referred to earlier, because they're the type of houses that tend to trade the most. And I had a look, for example, at Drogheda. So in Drogheda at the minute, there's about 375 properties advertised for sale, 50 sale agreed, so that's about 15%. So you can see once you move from the rural into the urban, the conversion rate improves. And then obviously when we move from the rural county to the urban area of Dublin, there's a significant increase there. And I think that's what's emphasising this two-tier market.